Suzuki at Columbia University. I attended his lectures for 3 years in Zen Buddhism. And these lectures took place late in the afternoon, between 4 and 6. And the windows were very often open when the weather was good. And directly in line with the LaGuardia airport was this room where Suzuki was speaking. So that when the airplanes passed over, and they did it intermittently, everything he said was drowned out. You couldn't hear a word. He never repeated what he had said, and no one ever asked him to repeat. People were continually going to sleep. And when they woke up, they never asked anyone what had happened. I must say, of course, that I know little about China because we have not been...
We are very badly informed.
We're very badly informed. But what is evident is that there was, some decades ago, this serious problem, and that Mao found a solution so that the people are not divided as they formerly were between the rich and the poor, but they are working together to solve the problems as they see them. Mao, he thought of the peasant in China as being the basis of the society, rather than the factory worker. Each person is able to do all the things that any human being can do, but through circumstances and so forth, we often become specialists rather than whole people. Well, one of the things that Mao has insisted upon for the Chinese is that if there is an army, that everyone is in it. If there is agriculture to do, everyone should be able to do it. If the land is to be changed so that it will not be flooded periodically, everyone in the community goes to work to bring about this change, even those who are old, even those who are young. From a capitalistic point of view, Mao appears to be a dictator and a slave leader. But from another point of view, he is the bringer together of the family.
I remember that when we were speaking about this the other day, that you saw some correspondence between
that and music.
That and music, and that and your music in particular.
Well, I've made a number of changes in my music as the time has passed. And my first change was one which would be of no interest to Mao whatsoever, I think. Namely, I wished, when I first used chance operations, to make a music in which I would not express my feelings or my ideas, but in which the sounds themselves would change me. They would change my, in particular, my likes and dislikes. I would discover through the use of chance operations done faithfully and conscientiously, I would discover that things that I had thought I didn't like, that I actually liked them. So that rather than becoming a more and more refined musician, I would become more and more open to the various possibilities of sounds. This has actually happened, so that my my preference as an individual in terms of musical aesthetic experience is not any of my music and not any of the music of any other composer, but rather the sounds and noises of everyday life.
You said something in...
And here we come, here we come to another connection with Mao. He would have little interest in the complexities of modern music. And were I to go to China, I believe, only be useful to the Chinese as a mushroom hunter. But I might also be useful as a person who could point out the pleasure of environmental sound, which I think is accessible to, well, as we say here in the United States, to the man in the street. And just recently I received a cartoon, a newspaper cartoon, from someone I don't know, showing a person who appeared to be a symphony conductor, but instead of conducting a symphony, he was simply conducting the sounds of the environment. And this person, whom I don't know, made a little note on the cartoon saying, the idea is beginning to get across. Would you, Chris, do it? Mao's solutions appear to many people to be political, but I like to think of them as being utilitarian, like Fuller's. Mao always encouraged criticism of the government on the part of any individual, including children in China, through the use of the big character posters. I think that much of our imagining that China is a slave state comes from the translations of Mao's writings and the big character posters into English, because English is actually a slave language, whereas Chinese language is actually anarchic. Chinese language lacks syntax in the strict sense that English has it, where yes and no are very clearly opposites in English, they are not in Chinese. I certainly anciently in China, perhaps less so now, one could give consideration to a number of characters for a long time, because different meanings would come from the same characters. Whereas in English, if you spend a long time with a single sentence, you tend to go toward one idea rather than toward many. Shall we stop for a moment? It's become clearer and clearer to me that when I express any idea, that other ideas which are seemingly contradictory must also be expressed. Otherwise, we have something that is only a half-truth. And it's very apparent to us now that if we say that it is desirable to be free of the likes and dislikes, that it's also extremely urgent now to be full of likes and dislikes. to just give a single instance, the pollution of our megalopolitan environments with respect to air, water, and earth, we must grow to dislike this situation intensely.
Especially if you get a sanitation strike on top of that.
Right.
Like last year.
Right. But there will be transitions from current pollution to hopefully future good air, good water, good earth. And at every point in that transition, and even now when the situation is intolerable, the enjoyment of life on the aesthetic level is constantly open. What are you speaking of?
We were speaking about this recording, weren't we?
Oh, yes, and you asked me what use it had, and I said I didn't think it had any use. Because though people think they can use records as music, what they have to finally understand is that they have to use them as records. And music instructs us, I would say, that the uses of things, if they are meaningful, are creative. Therefore, the only lively thing that will happen with a record is if somehow you use it to make something which it isn't. If you could, for instance, make another piece of music with a record, including a record and other sounds of the environment or other musical instruments, that I would find interesting. And in fact, one of my pieces has that, the Credo in Us. Uses Dvorak. It could have used any other phonograph record or series of them. But that record itself now, which includes the record, needs, in order to become lively, still more things. But unfortunately, most people who collect records and use them in quite another way.
What would you think will be the use?
They use them as a kind of portable museum.
Yeah.
Or portable concert hall.
Is involved with organization.
So we have nothing in this country that we can be unashamed of.
But when you picture the situation here in the United States with these big financial and industrial corporations, do you think that a non-violent revolution would be capable of doing away with that?
I think so. When I say I think so, you have to realize it's wishful thinking. But the deep involvement of our educational system in our capitalistic system, that is to say, you go to school not to learn, but in order to get a degree which will permit you to enter into a job,
Into a business
into a business situation, so that the moment you graduate from college, what it means is that you no longer have to learn anything. Whereas, as Illich has pointed out, is that education is of no value unless it continues through life. And this is what Fuller has also pointed out, is that we must not graduate, we must go on studying. That this is the proper life. But nowhere in America do you find these things understood in a way that is good, except among individuals. And this is why not only I, but now many, many more people say that our proper business is revolution.
how would you think you personally could do something to change the situation?
Well, I'm too old to do much of any good now. But all I do is speak and write. And we already know that speaking and writing has no influence.
Has music influence?
Music less. Just play any music you like for two people and then talk to them afterward and see what went on in their heads.
Is this because music lacks semantics?
Right?
Is this because music lacks semantics?
It may be that, and it may be because people don't know how to listen, that they haven't even thought what music could be or what it could do to them. For instance, the average person, I think, going to I don't want to say anything about it, but I think that people can easily go to a concert and come away just as stupid as they were when they went in. What people say about me is that some of them take me quite seriously as a philosopher and say that I'm really a good philosopher and an amateur musician. And then others who find my thinking rather absurd say, well, he's really not a bad composer, but just an amateur philosopher.
Your philosophical ideas have developed in a certain way, and your musical ideas also. Do they have developed parallel in parallel to each other?
It's hard for me to say. I think in general, I would like to have things become more open. And it may be that at heart I'm so closed, I don't know. With respect to my thinking or philosophy and so forth, if, for instance, you oblige me to get out silence and read some passages from it, I find them very good and almost useful for me to read now, therapeutically so, or philosophically so. In other words, I rather admire my former thinking in many ways more than my present thinking. But that may be because in going on, I have tried to become open, particularly to social problems. And as you know now, society as it is changed in China. And this brings about a situation where my thinking is perhaps more confused than it was when I wrote many of the things in silence. Much of what I wrote in silence was the result of studying or the result of explaining work which I had actually done. Yeah. In other words, I either knew what I was saying or I was studying, for instance, with Suzuki, and his thought of Zen Buddhism and so forth was being learned by me. Whereas now my confusion comes from the fact that I don't so much write about my work as I write about just anything that I notice. And I think that many people would agree with me that what can be noticed now is extraordinarily confusing.
If you would regard this album as representing a certain part of American musical life, and also as the particular music of a certain generation of composers, although they are rather different in age, but they came about the world, so to speak, at a particular moment and stayed with it. What would you say are the differences between those composers involved, that is Cage, Brown, yourself, and Morty Feldman, who at least happened for
Right,
music,
right.
For Europe,
It's
for
nice you ask
Europe,
it that way, because people
as one group of composers.
And so and still I think we're thought of as a unit, and at the moment it seems clear that we're very different indeed. Just in the experience of it, it seems to me you could never confuse a Feldman piece with a Cage piece if you just listen, use your ears and listen. Well, the difference is we just described three different composers, really. The easiest in a way to describe is Feldman, because he's established and followed consistently such a clear line, or such a clear world. He's created a world and has stayed in it and hasn't really changed it very much over the years. It's a music which it's very exquisite and it's very fine, and it's very close to the art world of that period, the abstract expressionist period. Cage always changes, so that's, if you were trying to characterize this work, that's the way you would do it, it seems to me, by the fact that it sets out programmatically and deliberately to move on. And so that you were at opposite poles from the Feldman situation, which preserves and develops a kind of quality of feeling or sentiment, where in the Cage it's not so much feeling as what you could call intellectual rigor that's always at work. There's a kind of hard consistency of mind at work, and not of sound, and not of specific idea, but of the quality of the ideas. And then, of course, with the Cage, he's moved out of the musical world very much. Feldman is now very clear. You can locate him in the musical tradition. Well,
what actually is it that still keeps you together?
When we all started to make our music and join John and meet John and show each other our music and do concerts with our music together, there was a sense that we were the only ones doing music in this general line, and I think in fact we were, just for a few years at least. And our pieces were programmed together, and the programs, generally speaking, were brought about by the energies of John. John has always been very insistent on bringing music forward and putting on concerts and getting people to play these things and publicizing it and so on. And he is the one who had the most energy of all of us and seemed to know how to do it best, so that for a few years at least, he, together with David Tudor, really created a kind of scene in which this music came forward, and hence people associated it, associated us with one another. And at the time, I think the whole orientation of the music was, as a whole, so different from anything else that people tended to merge one figure into another rather indiscriminately. And it took a little while, I think, before you could really hear clearly that there were very different tendencies at work. And then the other thing I think is one that I think Morty has expressed very nicely on various occasions, that what John made possible in a way was simply a feeling that what we were doing was all right, was just possible. And there was just a sense of mutual support, if you like. Of a sort of small band, guerrilla band, if you like. I mean, that didn't last very long. It was very attractive, and obviously you can't sustain it for too long. But it certainly was there, I think, at the beginning, and it was very exciting. And I think that's the image that survived over all these years, after, we all went our separate ways.
Mr. Feldman, most of your music is very soft at the limit of audibility, which means technically, in the case of record, at the limit of tape hiss. I should say your music is, there's a contradiction between your music and the world in which we live. The world is much louder. Would you agree that your music is negative in the sense that it is a negation of the existing world, that is the meaning of it, and that your particular technique to negate the world is softness?
If I may be presumptuous, I could say that all important things negate the world or are in contradiction to the world. I feel that my music is important. I feel that my music is important to the world. But I find that various attitudes in the world is making it more possible for my music to exist than, for example, 20 years ago, where the environment seemed totally hostile to the music. My music is quiet, but the audiences in the past 20 years have become more quiet.
But the environment, the technical environment, it's another thing than people. You see, the world is a technique. Am I right when I say that your music implies the postulate that the world must change, or that it must be changed, that it must be arranged in a manner that it is even acoustically possible to listen to a piece of you?
I would like to say yes, but I can't. Because I don't write my music in relation to the attitudes of the public.
Of course not.
You see.
But
so, I would like to say...
But objectively, independently from your subjective intentions, objectively, your music postulates that the world must change. I want to come to the concept of revolution. And in that particular case, we have even acoustical criteria for that.
I think that the world would listen, perhaps, with more tolerance if they could grasp any ideas connected with the music. I think that's part of the impatience of the listener, is that the music seems to float, doesn't seem to go in any direction. One doesn't know how it's made. There doesn't seem to be any type of dialectic going alongside it, explaining it. They are not told how to listen. That is the problem. Most music listens for the public.
It reminds me of a phrase that someone used in terms of Gertrude Stein's writing and said her writing left the reader alone with the writing.
Yeah.
I have great problems, if not confusion, about what happens to my music after it leaves my home. I don't know its place in the world. I don't even know its responsibility in the world. I always thought that the responsibility was that I wrote it. It wasn't until this music became somewhat known in the world that I was told I had other responsibilities besides writing it. And I have never really discovered what these responsibilities are. Something is expected of me.
I don't know whether
I don't know what is expected
a
of me.
composer has really a responsibility, socially speaking. The field of art is not responsibility but frivolity. Frivolity, that means liberty. You know, art is not reality. The field of aesthetics is more free. You can make a revolution in art to make it in the real world. That's another problem and another responsibility. Art is a thing that means something. It's not a thing that is something. The world has no meaning. It's useless to discuss the meaning of the world. But the meaning of art
That's why we discuss it so much.
is a possible subject of discussion.
Yeah. I think it's possible to discuss the meaning of the world, too. It's not possible to expect an answer, but the fact of discussing is its own way of transforming it. But anybody to discuss
works of art are conceived to be understood.
Not
the
mine.
world is not conceived to be understood.
My works of art are not conceived to be understood. I don't believe in understanding as an absolute.
Do you know Lord Byron's remark? Who will explain the explanation? It's very good.
Mr. Brown, your pieces, as we experienced it today in the case of Folio, have a kind of sociology, I should say. They are social models.
Well, there's a real social condition that exists between me as a composer, the score as a separate thing from me as a composer, and the musicians who are separate from all the previous two. But we are in a sort of ambiguous social relationship, the society of it's a different society than the society of a conductor conducting a Mozart symphony. Yeah. That there is a social situation is created by the way I want to create music. Or rather than to say the way I want to create music, the way I want the music to come into existence through me.
It's a dictatorship of loudness.
But it's not enforcing
in beat
itself
and
on
pop
anybody
music,
that doesn't...
you have always mechanical beat.
But one doesn't have to
like
go
a
and
machine.
Listen to it.
This is the real machine music.
But that's their choice.
It's more than choice, Earle. I feel, for example, I feel that there's a fascistic element, for example, in the Rolling Stones.
Yes, absolutely.
In the Rolling Stones.
There's an aggressive element.
Aggressive and regressive historically. It's a regression to a state of music so primitive that it even never existed.
But all music has not regressed to that state.
No. But the new generations are really dominated.
They've already been tired of it. You're a little late. They're already tired of it. There's a whole new scene going on. It's not this enforced loudness.
I don't agree with you, Earle. I feel that Metzger.
You think it's fascistic, the choice that these people make in playing their music loudly? Is it any more fascistic than that you play your music softly? You choose to make your music soft. They choose to make theirs loud. Vive la différence.
You would say everybody has the right to have his own taste, to like certain things, to dislike other things.
Right. Well, what do you envision? Some organization which prohibits the performances of such pieces?
No, I'm against the prohibition. But the insight of people
You want to change the insides of people?
Should be developed in a manner that they can judge it.
But is there not enough of what you might call reasonable music in the world that might be changing the insides of people? In other words, I always used to agree with Varese. Varese would never join polemical sides, you know?
Not
he said,
in public.
Listen, he said, if you've got a different idea, then write the music, and that music will have its effect, and it will change things. Don't stand around and holler, I've been offended, help. He says, the best thing that you can do is to not put yourself in a polemical position verbally, but just write a better piece of music if you've got a better idea. Yeah? Because it's the examples of things that are better, that change people, not forcing them to change.
Do you think good things change people or bad things change people?
Both change people.
Both.
Name one good thing.
Your music.
Changed nobody. In fact, Lucas Foss told me not to go to Germany. I'm going to Berlin for a year. He says, don't go there. I said, why not? He said, you'll have no impact on the culture. He says,
that's because Lucas is looking for a huge impact.
Do I want to change people? That's an interesting question. Let's get back to that question. That's not a bad question. I think that if you're happy with something, you don't want to change it. And I think that we did change things. Yeah. And I think that you changed things. I mean, why didn't you go into total serialization? Why didn't you go in for total control?
I tried it. I wasn't satisfied with it.
Why not? That's because the direction. That was the direction. That was the main line.
Well, who says I'm a mainliner? The point is, I had a different idea. I was not satisfied with serial music.
Your idea was in the air. A kind of like a statistical possibility of all the things that might happen.
The statistics and serialism are absolutely at the opposite poles. My music does have a statistical coefficient going on. But I wrote serial music and a kind of statistical control of music out of the Schillinger techniques that I studied. But that was before the folio pieces. Yeah. Because I did folio pieces at the same time I was doing those serial pieces because I was looking for another way. But,
if there is a control in the November piece or in the December piece, this control means only that stupidity in reading it is forbidden.
Stupidity in reading it?
Yes. It is forbidden to read it in a stupid way.
I can't do
that.
Not
to understand it.
I mean, I can't control who buys my score and does it stupidly. I can't forbid it.
When he does it stupidly, it's not a piece. That's the control.
Well, so is it mine done stupidly? If they're starting from that point, that's graphic score of mine, and they do it that stupidly, then it's my piece stupidly.
No, it's not your piece anymore.
Well, in one sense, you're right, because the graphic pieces, November 1952 and December 1952, I have said in program notes over and over again that what the results are not my music,
of course,
which is not a cop-out of responsibility. It's to say that I have created a condition. Now, this is a new thing in art in general. What I did in those pieces was to create an environment of potential, graphically and verbally, and that environment of potential is entered into to the detriment of the work or not. Just as the potential of a city can be stupidly organized and violated But that doesn't mean that the houses are all bad. Which is another thing.
These pieces are not what they are. They can become we don't know what.
Exactly, yeah. That's what interests me.
And
about
in
them,
100 years, we can't imagine what it will be.
Yeah. And I can stand back and observe that because those pieces, I mean, the results of those pieces do not belong to me. They never can be my property. The only thing I did was to create the environment, the conditions under which people can get together and make music. I'm not an anti-ego or the kind of ego which prides itself by being non-egoistic. I think there's a whole sophistry going on about ego. But anyway, I'd say there's the other pieces that I do write 80 or 90% of the given information of. Those pieces I say unhesitatingly, those are my pieces in a certain sense. Those are my results that come about. But these pieces interest me because they seem to be some of the first pieces which allow that situation of non-owning. And just because it says December 1952, Earle Brown, in program notes, when I conduct it, I insist that they say, this is the score, graphic score by Earle Brown. What you will hear is the results of the collaboration between all of the people that do it. If you like it, then you must credit those people. If you dislike it, you have to blame me for having such a dumb idea. But it's that dumb idea, strangely enough, has come into some working these days.
Well, you see, there's a big problem just talking about practical things, like how music is today. And Earle Brown was telling me in London that he just got back from Zagreb, and the whole panel was what will be the music of the future. And some young journalist from Copenhagen came to interview me in London. The first thing he said to me, what will be the music of the future? I would like to talk about abstract things, because those are the things that I think the audience has to get involved with. The trouble with immediate things is that immediate things, everybody is an expert. But with abstract things, there will be more silences in the questions, more silences in the answers. We'll mix the abstract with the concrete. I think one, a priori, for example, of what is concrete in my musical life was, just like in everybody else's, was our initial education, our initial upbringing. And then how this education affects you. In other words, I had the same education as everyone else. I went to a high school in which I got a very lively musical education. I went to the same concerts with my friends. One friend in particular was a well-known professor in America. We had exactly the same information, exactly the same background, exactly...
Yeah, but you see, that's totally uncharacteristic of my background. I grew up in a very small town. There were no concerts to go to. I didn't have any musical education in the high school. I was taught how to play the trumpet, and the musical influences I came under were primarily jazz and pop music at that point. So it's not, that's not characteristic. You're in New York. I was in Lunenburg, Massachusetts. That's a hell of a big difference.
For many years now, you are writing these soft pieces. Sometimes I think there are kind of mourning epilogue to murdered Yiddishkeit in Europe and dying Yiddishkeit in America, especially in New York. Is there something true about it?
It's not true, but at the same time, I think there's an aspect of my attitude about being a composer that is mourning, say, for example, the death of art. I mean, remember that I'm a New Yorker, and a New Yorker doesn't think about Yiddishkeit. You think about Yiddishkeit if you live with only 5,000 other Jews in Frankfurt. So I haven't got that problem. I mean, I don't think of myself as Jewish in New York. But I do, in a sense, mourn something that has to do with say Schubert leaving me. Understand? Also, I really don't feel that it's all necessary anymore. And so what I try to bring into my music are just very few essential things that I need to at least keep it going for a little while more. I don't think this explains anything, does it? The only thing that applies to me, as you talk about Yiddishkeit, is the fact that because I'm Jewish, I do not identify with, say, Western civilization music. In other words, when Bach gives us a diminished fourth, you see, I cannot respond but then that diminished fourth means, oh God, you see. I cannot respond to that diminished fourth as a symbol. But what my music is mourning, I just don't know what to say. I said just earlier that perhaps just mourning I must say you did bring up something that I particularly don't want to talk about publicly, but I do talk privately. To some degree, I do believe, for example, like with George Steiner, that after Hitler, perhaps there should no longer be art. Those thoughts are always in my mind. It's almost a hypocrisy, a delusion to continue. Because those values prove to me nothing. They have no longer any moral basis. And what are our morals in music? Our morals in music is 19th century German music, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I do think about that. And I do think about the fact that I want to be the first great composer that is Jewish.